Good morning. Merry Christmas. Oh, you guys are awake. This is going to be fun. Hey, if you have a Bible, open it up to John chapter 1. John chapter 1. What makes Christmas meaningful? That's our question for today. I'm sure many of us would have many different answers on what makes Christmas meaningful for you. Maybe it's the people you spend it with, the traditions that you engage in, the gifts that you buy, the gifts that you receive, the cookies that you eat, the dinners you prepare, whatever it might be. We all have our different reasons for why this season is meaningful. And they're great. And every year we have certain things that we want to slide back into or do the same way that we've done every year because they give us meaning or they have meaning in them. Like it's not Christmas until you buy your first hot chocolate at Starbucks or you go to the lights at the zoo or whatever it might be. That's when it feels like Christmas for you. And it's meaningful. Well, we're in this study of John chapter 1. We're going to look in particular at verse 14 today. And there's four very theologically rich statements that I think when properly understood move us, but also make Christmas meaningful. And here's my hope. Maybe it's a bit bold, that you would remember this verse and almost like a tradition every year you would think on this passage, not my words, but these words, and it would be in part what makes Christmas meaningful for you. So we're going to look at these four statements and see where they lead us in the text, and I'll try to make them or help them make more sense so there's more meaning in them than just the words that we tend to or at times read over quickly. The first phrase is this, and the Word became flesh. And now in the Bible, the word is capitalized, and we've talked over the last few weeks that the word, the pronoun here, it represents Jesus, that Jesus became flesh. This is a feat unparalleled in history, where God not just became man, but also remained God. So the proper Christian understanding of the incarnation, it's the term that we use, is that Jesus existed for all of time, but for 33 years of his eternal existence, he stepped into the flesh. The word is sarx, S-A-R-X. It's kind of got a harshness to it, both in how we say it in English and how somebody in the original Greek would say it. And the word doesn't just have a harshness to its sound, there's a harshness to its meaning, the flesh. And with it is all of the things that we would think of when we think of that word, the flesh, the temptations of the flesh, the desires of the flesh, the humanness of the flesh, the cold, the hurts, all that life and this world throws at us. And Christ, out of the glory and the splendor of heaven, he, in all of his eternal existence, wasn't created on what we celebrate as Christmas Day. He, in that day, stepped into the flesh. The Apostle Paul would write about this later in the book of Philippians, and he would use a verb that seems like he took the flesh upon him. If you've ever seen the classic movie Men in Black, then that idea might make sense to you, where the flesh rips off and the alien reveals himself underneath. Now, Jesus is not an alien, okay? All right, let's put that one to rest. Now, he is God, was God, stepped in, took on the flesh upon himself. Now, to the Greek listener of this phrase, the dualistic nature of God seemed almost incomprehensible to them, or at least disgusting. How could God, in all of his perfection, remain God and step into the brokenness of the dirty flesh and still remain perfect? Well, he did. So God steps in and he takes the flesh upon himself, almost as if to conceal his godness. The Word became flesh. And why? The writer of the book of Hebrews, we don't exactly know who it is historically, but the writer, he gives us a little hint of why the Word became flesh, why he took the flesh upon himself. It says that as doing, or in so doing, Christ could then be our perfect high priest. He could be our perfect mediator because he knew and felt all that we have known and felt. It means if 2017 has had any loss for you, Christ knows loss. If it's had any pain, any hurt, any despair, any brokenness, that Christ knows that. Not just as a God who created it, but as a God who became man, yet remained God in the flesh and experienced the hurt, the pain, and the brokenness that each and every one of us has felt. He felt it in the same way. This is unparalleled to any other faith. This is unique to Christianity, God and man, the dual nature of Christ in his incarnation. The Word becoming flesh. Why is Christmas meaningful? Why is it meaningful? Because in it, Christ became like you and I so that we could become like him. See, it was only by Christ stepping into the flesh and not giving into the same temptations that you and I give into the flesh could Christ be perfect in the flesh so that you and I one day would be able to step out of our flesh into the perfection of Christ. He became like us so that we could become like him. That's why Christmas is meaningful, because the Word became flesh. But what did it do, the Word or the Christ, when it became flesh? It dwelt among us. The Word didn't become flesh and immediately assume a kingly or a powerful position. It came, right, away in a manger as a baby, a child that did all of the same things that other babies and children do. He stepped in. It says he dwelt among us. The verb in dwelt among us is iskanasan, which best translated is to tabernacle. That word to tabernacle doesn't mean much to us, but now to the Jewish reader, we see John first appealing to the Greek reader in the first line, and then in the second, he appeals to the Jewish reader because Christmas is for everybody. And so now he appeals to the Jewish reader, and he says that the Christ came in the flesh and he dwelt, or he tabernacled among us, which would be an obvious reference back to the time when the Jewish people were wandering and God told them, build a tabernacle. Build a tabernacle, and in the tabernacle, my presence will dwell. And so if you want to connect with God, if you need to experience God, then go into the tabernacle, and there you could experience his presence. That's how the faith under the law existed for thousands of years. It's what humanity was longing for, was something better than that. Now, when the Jews settled, they said, build a temple. It was like the permanent tabernacle. The tabernacle they would pick up and they'd go to another place, they'd set it back up, and then they'd go to another place and settle. Once they settled, they built a temple. And these phrases, to tabernacle or to temple, are almost interchangeable in the scriptures. But now he says this. He says the Word became flesh and dwelt, or tabernacled, among us. In other words, something better than the temple and the tabernacle is here. Something better than having to go into this building or this space to experience God is here. Listen, as the movie is supposed to be more entertaining than the teaser or the trailer, right? As the meal is supposed to be more filling than the appetizer. So Christ in his presence, in his stature here, is better than what the tabernacle or the temple was. Now the Christ and the presence of God was to be everywhere. Why is Christmas meaningful? Because in Christmas, God's presence now dwells among us permanently. Said another way, Christ came and he dwelt on earth temporarily so that you and I could be with him permanently. And had he not, we wouldn't be able to. The Word became flesh. It dwelt among us. And sometimes I think we, or I can't fully, maybe you have this problem too, can't fully comprehend what it was like for Christ to dwell on earth. Because this is all we know. Can you remember or think of a time in like your worst dwelling place? Maybe it was your first apartment as a married couple. And you think back at it and you kept the heat at 62, right? Or maybe it was your college dorm room or whatever else it might be. And just the environment itself was nothing lovely. It was something that you desired to get out of. It was something that like, this is not how I want to dwell forever. For me, it was football camp my freshman year of college. I barely survived 4 weeks. This was prior to Wi-Fi and cell phones, okay? So for those of you who think I'm just a young guy, I know life before these things. I literally communicated via email from the library, okay? I use the email stephenwhitlow1@juno.com. If you guys want to email me, you can. I haven't checked it in 10 years. But it's the email that I still give to retailers today just so they can meet their quota. You can use it if you want. I dwelt in that, finally escaped it after 4 weeks, and it felt lovely. And when you're dwelling in something temporarily, all you can think of is what's on the other side. And when you're dwelling in that place, it isn't pleasant. And there's a natural tendency to want to complain or to argue or to do things you shouldn't do. Christ stepped out of eternal existence of perfection and then dwelt here for 33 or so years, never sinning, knowing that he would then eventually dwell for eternity back in perfection. But he came and he dwelt here in the middle of these two things temporarily so that you and I could dwell with him permanently in the perfection. That's why Christmas is meaningful. The Word became flesh. It dwelt among us. Then goes on to say, and we, who are the we? And it says, we have seen his glory. Who's we? We, the apostle writing it, and the we would be the other apostles around him. Do you need proof? Are you one of those who would look in at the scriptures or look in at the story of Jesus and say, I may believe it if there were more proof? Here we have 12 undeniable men of history. I mean, nowadays we'll believe something if one person posts about it on Facebook. Here we have 12 people who wrote multiple pieces of literature, all corresponding and working with each other and preserved through history, who will say, we have seen his glory. We saw it with our own eyes. This is not a matter of did it historically happen. It is a matter of will you personally embrace it. It says, we have seen his glory. Now, Moses in the Old Testament said, I want to see your glory. And God said, if you see my glory, you end up dead. So Moses said, okay, I don't want to see your glory. What can I see? Just a glimpse of a shadow of his glory. It said his face was radiant afterwards. But he says this, we have seen his glory. So how can this make sense? How can this idea that we have seen his glory? Why is Christmas meaningful? Because it has begun to reveal the hidden glory of God. Because in Christmas, we now begin to see the glory of the Son of God who took the flesh upon himself, who covered himself or clothed himself or disguised himself in the flesh. But he was so glorious that even as the flesh covered him, as people got closer and closer to him, they saw his glory. It couldn't help but escape. I mean, is this true for you? What I mean is this. The more somebody knows you, do they see more of your glory? Some of you have been married for 20 years. You might be proudful enough to be like, yes, I've been married for 20 years and my wife knows all of my glory now. I've been married for a year and that's not true for me, so I'm not you. I mean, I'm sure there are things in a year into our marriage that Lindsay knows about me that she did not know prior to, and they're not all glorious. Not so with the Christ. The more they got to know him, the closer that they got, the more of the glory that just spilled out of him. Not even the flesh could conceal it. not even the flesh could hide it. Why is Christmas meaningful? It's revealed the glory of God, the hidden glory of God. Glory as of the only Son from the Father. What it's saying there is that Jesus is the only one who is of the exact same nature as God. Now, he allows us to become his children also, but our nature is in Christ. Jesus was the only one, the exact nature of the Father, the exact nature of God. And who is he? This fourth statement. What is he like? What's he like? Another problem sometimes people have with Christianity, they say, well, I would love God if I knew what he was like. Oh, well, here's what he's like. He is full of grace and truth. Grace and truth. Full of grace and truth. Isn't it crazy how I can tell that was my daughter? I didn't even see her. I was just like, Reagan, what's up? It's full of grace and truth. Why grace and truth? Why them both? Why not just grace? I mean, haven't you heard this argument? Like, why can't God just be a God of grace? Why can't it just be all grace all the time? Like, why also truth? Now, stick with me here. If he was just a God of grace, if there was no just part of God, then there would be no satisfactory answer to those who have faced injustice. Only by him being a God of grace and truth, only by him establishing the truthful, perfect standard, can we say we now know that this is right. This is wrong because he's full of grace and truth. Now others, you're messed up because you don't even understand your own depravity. Be like, why can't he just be a God of truth? Because each of us would fail under his perfect standard. Because if he was just a God of truth and no grace, none of us would live up to the truth standard, to the true nature of God's perfection. We need a God who is both full of grace and truth. Both. And that's the God we have. He's full of grace and he is full of truth. Now, what of this, or what of him being full of grace and truth? We'll skip over verse 15. It's really parenthetical. We'll jump down to verse 16, and here it says this. For from his fullness of what? His fullness of grace and truth. For from that fullness, like the sun pouring down on you midday on your southern vacation. Like that type of fullness, like that type of overwhelmingness. Like tonight my grandparents will cook food for 50 people. Only 20 of us are invited. Like that type of fullness. That type. We draw from the inexhaustible warehouses of God. And from his fullness, we have received something, a gift. We've received something. What have we received? We have all received what? Grace upon grace. Because he is full of grace and truth, out of that fullness, now we all receive grace upon grace. Do you see the picture? Jesus in all of his fullness. It's so full, it's overflowing that it just falls on us. It just falls on us as grace. Just falls on us. Now, what is this grace upon grace? Why the double saying of it? I mean, in some ways, it's like getting a great Christmas gift and saying, yes and yes. Awesome and awesome. But it has more meaning than that. I mean, what does this mean? This grace upon grace. Why grace upon grace? It speaks to the free will giving of it. The freely offered gifts of grace. Grace upon grace speaks to the advancement of grace, like grace on you so that you can then be grace towards others. You say, well, what is this grace? It's this word charis, C-H-A-R-I-S, and it means abundant, overflowing, plentiful. Grace upon grace. This grace upon grace is God's goodwill towards you. Verse 17, for the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth, grace upon grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. I'll say it briefly, then I'll explain it. For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. Why is Christmas meaningful? Because in Christmas we get the gospel. See, the gospel is that Jesus is grace and truth. What is the truth? The truth is that he was perfect and we were not. And then not being perfect, we are set apart from him. But what is grace? That though we were not perfect, he was, and his love is poured out on us. Grace and truth. Christmas gives us the gospel. Now, how do we understand this gospel? I grew up playing Nintendo. Anyone else in this room? Okay, good. You're saved. Okay. For the record, I'm not allowed to do that. Okay. I grew up playing Nintendo, and I'm a bit of a Nintendo purist. What I mean by that is when Super Mario Brothers 1 came out, when I got that on that glorious Christmas day, and then we opened up the game and put it into the Nintendo and began to play it, I discovered something, and that was this, that there were, of course, 8 worlds. You had to buy the magazine. There was no internet to tell you this. There were 8 worlds, and there were 4 levels in each world, which means you needed to win 32 different times in order to beat the game. And as you were playing the game as 7-year-old Stephen, the Nintendo purist knew you needed to get as many coins and as many extra lives as possible, because at some point in time, the game would get harder and it would destroy you. The mushroom would shrink you. The green turtle shell would come faster than you thought. Koopa's fire would burn you. There is no greater metaphor for hell, right? Okay. And so you would do everything you could. I mean, I was the guy who would reset the game and start over if I missed a coin, because I'm going to need that coin. And you would give it your best effort, and you would do what you could to rescue the princess. And then what would happen? Inevitably, especially when you were 7, you would die. And when you died, the game was over unless what? If you're a Super Mario Brothers 1 player, you know the answer. It wasn't Super Mario Brothers 3 where you could save it. Heresy. No. Super Mario Brothers 1, there was only one way to get continuation. You would grab your thumbs and you would hit A, B, 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 A, B as fast as you possibly could, just hoping for salvation on the other side. Continuation, that you would be able to play the game again. And all Nintendo purists have felt the deep despair of burning your thumbs out as quickly as you can and it taking you all the way back to the beginning of the game instead of being able to pick up where you left off. And every human who has ever fallen under either no grace or under the law has felt the despair of doing every single thing that you could, every good deed, but still messing up and trying to A-B your way back into God's love. It's like it's human nature. You mess up, A's a good deed, B's showing back up to church. A's giving a little bit of money, B's saying something nice to somebody. And you think if you A-B hard enough, God will be gracious enough to you to give you maybe another chance. That was what life was like under Moses. But grace and truth, grace upon grace, came on Christmas through Jesus. You know what's amazing? Nintendo re-released the system. It's unbelievable. Now you can play the exact same game. You can start as little Mario, get your mushroom, get your firepower, get right to the point where you're about to beat the game. And you know what you can do? You can pause it and save it. Now, the first time I saw this happen, I felt an overwhelming amount of guilt and shame. I'm not even kidding. I was like, you can't do that. You can't just pause it right before the hard part, die, start it over, and pick it up right there. You have to go all the way back to the beginning and work your way all the way back to that point. That's how Nintendo works. You put a 10-year-old in there, though, they don't know anything about the old covenant of Nintendo. They only know the new Nintendo covenant. And in that, they'll do it all the time. They'll pause it, they'll start over, they'll pause it, they'll continue, and they never feel bad about it. They just take the grace that Nintendo programmers have poured out over them. Oh, you died? It's okay. No, it's not. Yeah, it is. All you have to do is just hit reset. And it picks it up right there. You even have your firepower back. Grace upon grace means every time that you mess up and get hit by the mushroom or don't jump over the turtle shell, you still have your firepower. The presence of God is still in you. You don't have to go back to the beginning. That's what Christmas gave us. In the moment of Christmas, the grace upon grace was every time you mess up, every time you think that the overflowing nature of grace has finally run out, you look up and it's still pouring out on you as much as it ever has. And then as it pours on you, you look out to all of those who are around you. Your spouse, your kids, your enemies, your coworkers, your strangers, the people who are different, the people who don't think the same way. And you look at them, and when they look up at you, they see the same thing that you look at when you see Jesus. They see from you grace upon grace upon grace. You messed up, it's okay. It came to me, now it'll come to you. This isn't about a one-time raising your hand to accept salvation. Sure, we should do that. You should cross a line of faith. You should say, yeah, I'm sinful in my flesh. Jesus, thank you for becoming like me so that I can become like you. You should cross the line of faith. But the Christian life is not crossing a line of faith. The Christian life is living a life of grace upon grace. And that's what Christmas gave you. It's what Christmas gave you. And so my greatest concern today, of course, it's your eternal salvation. It is. And if you have not crossed the line of faith by confessing your sin in your flesh and embracing the gospel that came to you on Christmas, you need to do so. Because Christ came to dwell here temporarily so that you could dwell with him permanently. But if you don't embrace the gift of salvation, you will dwell without him permanently. Christmas came to make sure that didn't happen. So if you haven't embraced salvation, embrace it. You're dead in your sin. Christ came to make you alive in him. Embrace your salvation. Beyond that, my concern for you is not just your salvation. It's, are you living the Christmas life? Are you living the life of grace upon grace? Some of you, you're like me. You'd call yourself a purist. And you still think you have to A-B your way back. So every time you mess up, your first thought is, okay, now what good thing do I have to do? What good thing do I have to do to be okay again? Can I tell you what that good thing is? Nothing. He did it for you. He's done all good things. Receive it and live a life of grace upon grace. It is the only way you can look at those that hurt you and say, I forgive you. You can look at a past that is broken and say, it doesn't define me. You can look at hurt that has stung so deeply and say, it won't destroy me. Only by living a life of grace upon grace. That's why Christmas is meaningful.